April 12, 1945. Kakazu Ridge, Okinawa. 2:47 a.m. Under the cloak of a moonless night, a Japanese officer put pen to rice paper, recording an encounter that would later stand as one of the few first-hand reports of American night vision in World War II. His hands shook with disbelief as he documented a breakthrough that would overturn decades of Japanese military doctrine. The Americans had equipment that allowed them to see with complete clarity in total darkness. This was no rumor or speculation. Japanese infiltrators had been detected and eliminated at ranges of roughly 70 yards without any visible muzzle flashes. The enemy could see, while Japanese forces remained blind. For years, the Imperial Japanese Army had built its tactical doctrine around dominance in nocturnal operations. Night raids had been a cornerstone of Japanese strategy since the Russo-Japanese War of 1904, spreading fear and disarray among adversaries from the Pacific Islands to mainland Asia. On this ridge in Okinawa, however, the tables had turned. American soldiers were engaging infiltrators under conditions where Japanese forces expected to have a decisive advantage: complete darkness. Yet they were being neutralized with remarkable accuracy by adversaries who seemed to possess vision beyond human limits. The Japanese 62nd Division's Night Assault Unit suffered catastrophic losses. Each casualty was inflicted by precise, unseen fire. No illumination shells, flares, or searchlights exposed the attackers' positions. The Americans fired silently with deadly accuracy from locations that should have been invisible to them. The secret behind this capability was the .3 carbine, later classified as the M3, fitted with an advanced infrared sniper sight. This device enabled American troops to detect targets clearly between 70 and 125 yards, even in total darkness. The technology was so closely guarded that most US soldiers were unaware of its existence. Its deployment not only inflicted physical casualties but also shattered Japanese confidence in the principles of night combat that had guided their army for decades. Historically, Japan's expertise in nocturnal operations had deep roots. Since the Meiji Restoration, the Imperial Army had prioritized night maneuvers as a means to counter technologically superior Western forces. The night attacks at Port Arthur in 1904, which overwhelmed fortified Russian positions, became legendary. Lessons from campaigns in China further honed these tactics. Infiltrations, ambushes, and assaults under the cover of darkness were central to Japanese military identity. American intelligence had captured and translated the Japanese manual on night fighting in 1944, revealing the core of their doctrine: night nullifies mechanical advantages. In darkness, discipline, training, and courage dictate outcomes. One skilled Japanese soldier at night is equal to 10 foes dependent on technology. Yet on this Okinawan ridge, that doctrine collided with a reality it could not anticipate. Night, once Japan's most reliable tactical advantage, had been turned into a domain where only the Americans could operate freely. The encounter at Kakazu Ridge was not merely a battle in the dark, it was the beginning of a fundamental shift in how warfare would be conducted at night, proving that technology could overturn centuries of battlefield wisdom. The Japanese proficiency in nighttime warfare during World War II went far beyond simple propaganda claims. In 1942, the battles around Guadalcanal demonstrated the terrifying effectiveness of Japanese nocturnal attacks. During engagements at Edson's Ridge and Henderson Field, US Marines faced assaults so intense that the possibility of being overrun was very real. The victories were razor-thin. Commanders privately acknowledged that Japanese night tactics had nearly overwhelmed their forces. Colonel Merritt Edson, in his detailed after-action account, described the assaults vividly. The enemy moved silently, almost like phantoms, and Marines found themselves firing at shadows, fleeting sounds, and even illusions conjured by fear. The Japanese, by contrast, navigated the night as if it were second nature. Analysis conducted by the US Army's Operations Research Office revealed a stark numerical advantage for the Japanese during nocturnal engagements. Between 1942 and 1944, approximately 60% of American casualties occurred during night operations, even though night fighting accounted for only 30% of total combat hours. units trained specifically for nighttime infiltration inflicted disproportionately higher losses compared to standard daylight operations. In effect, darkness functioned as a strategic asset for Japanese forces. This advantage was no accident. Their soldiers underwent extensive night combat training. Months of preparation included exercises while blindfolded, forcing recruits to assemble and disassemble weapons purely by touch. They practiced moving silently in total darkness and communicating through subtle physical signals and prearranged codes. Additionally, they honed their auditory skills, learning to distinguish the mechanical noises of different U.S. firearms over distances of 50 yards or more. The U.S. response to this growing night warfare threat began not on the battlefield but within American laboratories. In 1943, the National Defense Research Committee initiated efforts to create night vision capabilities. RCA, Radio Corporation of America, which had been experimenting with image intensifier tubes since the mid-1930s, succeeded in developing the P25 tube. This technology could convert invisible infrared light into a visible image, paving the way for practical night fighting systems. The night vision system incorporated several components. An infrared spotlight, mounted above the carbine barrel, emitted light undetectable to the naked eye. A specialized scope containing the image intensifier tube converted this infrared illumination into a green-hued visible image. A substantial battery pack, worn on the operator's back and connected via cable, powered the entire assembly. The complete system weighed roughly 28 to 30 pounds, considerably heavier than a standard rifle, but it granted soldiers an unprecedented advantage: the ability to detect and engage targets under conditions of total darkness. The .3 carbine, later standardized as the M3, was an adaptation of the M2 carbine equipped with this infrared apparatus. During trials at Aberdeen Proving Ground, soldiers using the .3 demonstrated remarkable accuracy, hitting man-sized targets 80% of the time at 70 yards in pitch-black conditions. Depending on visibility and environmental factors, the effective engagement range varied from 70 yards in less favorable conditions to as much as 125 yards under optimal circumstances. By late 1944, production of these systems had begun on a limited scale. RCA manufactured roughly 1,700 night vision scopes throughout the war, but only about 150 complete 3x3 carbines were deployed to the Pacific Theater by spring 1945. Security around these new weapons was exceptionally strict. Only specially selected marksmen were trained to use them, and they were prohibited from discussing their operation with other personnel. The first significant combat deployment of infrared-equipped rifles occurred during the Battle of Okinawa, which began on April 1, 1945. U.S. Army units participating in the invasion, particularly the 96th and 7th Infantry Divisions, received the initial shipments of 3 carbines in the early days of April. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in night combat, where technological innovation provided American forces a critical countermeasure against the previously unchallenged Japanese dominance in darkness. During the Okinawa campaign, the deployment of infrared-equipped sniper rifles was highly restricted, usually limited to 2 per rifle company, primarily in areas where enemy night raids were anticipated. According to the official U.S. Army history, Okinawa, the last battle, these infrared targeting devices immediately demonstrated their effectiveness against the Japanese military's well-practiced nocturnal infiltration tactics. An after-action summary from the 96th Infantry Division highlighted that the enemy's night infiltration, previously our most pressing tactical challenge, was largely mitigated through new technology that enabled engagement of hostile forces under the cover of darkness. On the night spanning April 1–2, 1945, Japanese forces launched their customary nighttime incursions against American positions. Throughout the Pacific War, such attacks had caused severe losses and disrupted defensive lines, but during Okinawa, they confronted an unexpected obstacle: U.S. soldiers outfitted with infrared sniper scopes could detect enemy movements that the Japanese believed were hidden in total darkness. The 7th Infantry Division's report emphasized the psychological consequences. Once Japanese soldiers were exposed to precise fire in complete darkness, they displayed clear signs of disorientation and breakdown in coordination. Many of their conventional infiltration methods were abandoned after sustaining initial losses. The operation of the infrared scope was based on a relatively straightforward but groundbreaking principle. A specialized infrared spotlight, essentially a sealed beam lamp fitted with an infrared filter, projected an invisible cone of light up to roughly 150 yards. Objects illuminated by this light reflected it back into the scope, where the 1p25 image intensifier tube produced by RCA amplified the infrared signal and translated it into visible light, producing a sharp green-hued image for the operator. Technical Sergeant John Murray of the 96th Infantry Division, among the first soldiers trained to use this technology, recounted in a 1985 interview with the Army Center of Military History that the experience was unlike anything he had encountered. Observing Japanese troops through the scope, he said, they appeared as luminous green silhouettes against darker terrain. You could make out details, their faces, insignia, and even the weapons they carried. Their movements were disciplined and deliberate, reflecting high-level light infantry tactics, yet they were completely unaware of our surveillance. The psychological impact of this advantage was profound. Murray further explained, for 3 years the Japanese had dominated night operations. You could literally see that confidence in how they moved. Then, when we engaged them, confusion and panic quickly replaced that certainty. They were unable to comprehend how we could perceive them in the dark. The infrared spotlight's invisibility to the naked eye meant that Japanese forces could not anticipate or respond to it. Operators were instructed to take single shots or brief bursts and immediately change positions, preventing any effective counterattack even if the enemy could roughly gauge the direction of incoming fire. Within a week following the invasion, nocturnal operations by Japanese troops on Okinawa declined sharply. The 32nd Army, under General Mitsuru Ushijima, had initially planned extensive night counterattacks as a core part of their defensive strategy. These operations were largely abandoned after the initial losses suffered in the first days. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, the senior operations officer of the 32nd Army and one of the few high-ranking survivors, later recounted in his memoir, The Battle for Okinawa, 1973, the dramatic infrared technology. During the 3 years of conflict, Japanese night assault teams had developed a near-flawless record, but in the Okinawa campaign, they faced unprecedented losses before even reaching American defensive lines. The US forces possessed a capability that Japanese commanders could neither anticipate nor comprehend. While Colonel Yahara's memoirs do not explicitly reference infrared devices, it is unlikely he ever discovered the precise nature of the American advantage. He vividly recorded the total disruption of Japanese nocturnal operations. Units trained and specialized in night combat increasingly refused to leave their dugouts or caves after dark, abandoning infiltration methods honed over decades. Analysis conducted by the U.S. Army's Operations Research Office revealed striking results. During the first week of combat on Okinawa, units equipped with infrared optics accounted for roughly 30% of all Japanese small arms casualties at night, despite comprising less than 1% of the American weaponry in use. The exceptional efficiency of this technology forced rapid and sweeping tactical adjustments on the Japanese side. Declassified reports from 1945 detail both the potential and the limitations of these infrared sniper systems. The devices functioned reliably in total darkness but faced several operational constraints that Japanese forces never discovered. The battery units, composed of heavy lead-acid cells comparable to automotive batteries, permitted only 20 to 30 minutes of continuous operation. Intermittent usage could extend this to several hours. At nearly £30 for the complete assembly, the system restricted mobility, effectively making operators stationary specialists rather than conventional infantry. Environmental factors further limited effectiveness. Heavy rainfall reduced the usable range to under 40 yards. Fog and smoke scattered the infrared light, generating halos that obscured targets, and white phosphorus could temporarily neutralize the system. Japanese troops, unaware of the underlying technology, did not systematically test these conditions. Although the infrared spotlight itself was invisible to the naked eye, it could theoretically be detected through optical instruments equipped with certain coded lenses. Some Japanese naval binoculars possessed this capability, yet no operational procedures were developed to exploit it. As the campaign unfolded, U.S. forces refined the tactical employment of infrared scopes. The 7th Infantry Division pioneered a method known as infrared ambush, strategically placing devices along probable Japanese infiltration routes, near trails, water sources, and gaps in wire defenses. Positions remained concealed until enemy troops entered the pre-designated kill zones, then the operators engaged with precision. The 96th Infantry Division's after-action reports described a system of interlocking observation sectors, ensuring full coverage of key defensive fronts. Operators targeted individuals of opportunity while reporting larger enemy formations for artillery or mortar strikes. A psychological dimension was introduced through selective engagement. Some enemy infiltration attempts were ignored, while others were fully destroyed, generating a paralyzing uncertainty among Japanese forces. The limited number of infrared systems, approximately 150 for the entire Okinawa operation, dictated careful allocation. Priority was given to areas where night infiltration was most likely, including gaps in defensive lines, supply routes, water points, and approaches to command positions. Scarcity enhanced the effect, as Japanese units could never be certain where these capabilities were deployed. Japanese intelligence was intensely focused on uncovering the secret behind American night combat effectiveness. Captured documents, later translated by the Allied Translator and Interpreter Section, ATIS, show a wide range of Japanese hypotheses about U.S. night vision, from partially accurate assumptions to the highly speculative, underscoring their profound lack of understanding of this transformative technology. An intelligence summary from the 62nd Division dated April 20, 1945, raised the possibility that American forces were using infrared detection systems comparable to aerial reconnaissance cameras. It was noted that heavy rain might interfere with these devices, potentially limiting their effectiveness. While this speculation was fairly accurate, Japanese commanders lacked awareness of the active infrared spotlight mechanism, which prevented them from devising practical countermeasures. Another report reflected an even more speculative belief that the U.S. had developed a drug capable of improving night vision. This led some Japanese units to experiment with extremely high doses of vitamin A, mistakenly thinking it could enhance their visual acuity in darkness. Other misguided attempts included smearing mud on their bodies to reduce heat signatures, under the incorrect assumption that Americans were using thermal imaging. The clearest understanding emerged from a captured technical officer's notes, which stated that American troops employed a light source invisible to the naked eye, and that detection methods were unknown. Unfortunately, this insight arrived too late and was not widely shared among Japanese forces. The operational impact of infrared sniper scopes during the Okinawa campaign can be measured through various U.S. Army reports. Around 153 M3 carbines equipped with infrared optics were deployed. Within the first week, these units were responsible for approximately 30% of Japanese casualties during night engagements. From April 1 to June 1, 1945, Japanese night operations declined by an estimated 94%. Engagement distances under infrared observation expanded from roughly 10-15 yards typical for unaided night vision to over 70 yards. The 96th Infantry Division observed that areas under infrared coverage suffered 78% fewer successful infiltrations compared to sectors without such equipment. Beyond the physical losses, the psychological impact was profound. Japanese troops increasingly avoided nocturnal operations even in areas where infrared systems were not present. The 10th Army's Gu-2 intelligence summary highlighted this effect, noting that enemy units largely abandoned nighttime infiltration tactics, and prisoners frequently cited fear of American night vision capabilities. Whether these fears were grounded in reality or not, they effectively neutralized a major tactical advantage of the Japanese forces. The disruption of night operations had far-reaching consequences for Japanese defensive strategy. The 32nd Army had relied heavily on nighttime movement for resupply of frontline positions, evacuation of casualties, and reconnaissance. With nocturnal mobility curtailed, units became stranded in their defensive positions, unable to receive reinforcements or supplies. Forward positions, including caves and bunkers, were increasingly isolated, while wounded soldiers remained trapped. Communication between units, often conducted by runners under cover of darkness, collapsed. The comprehensive defense-in-depth strategy envisioned by General Ushima deteriorated into a series of isolated strongpoints, each of which could be systematically neutralized. According to the official history compiled by the U.S. Army, the Japanese inability or reluctance to operate at night, whether due to actual infrared surveillance or fear of it, accelerated the campaign significantly. Strong defensive positions that might otherwise have held for weeks were reduced in mere days. The combination of technological advantage and psychological pressure rendered night combat largely ineffective, reshaping the operational landscape in favor of American forces. When classified training documents were finally released decades later, they revealed just how seriously the United States treated the introduction of infrared sniper technology during the final phase of World War II. Far from being experimental or improvised, the program reflected a methodical and highly disciplined approach to a revolutionary battlefield capability. Selected operators were not ordinary infantrymen. They were drawn from experienced marksmen who had already demonstrated exceptional independence, composure under pressure, and psychological resilience. Before ever taking the system into combat, each operator completed approximately 40 hours of dedicated instruction. This training went well beyond basic marksmanship. Soldiers studied the physical principles of infrared radiation and image amplification, learned how green-tinted imagery altered depth perception, and practiced identifying targets and estimating distance under artificial night vision conditions. The curriculum also covered the practical realities of operating such fragile and complex equipment in combat. Soldiers were trained in field maintenance, rapid fault diagnosis, power management, and battery conservation, critical concerns for devices that relied on bulky, limited-capacity energy sources. Tactical doctrine was another major focus. Operators learned how to position themselves for maximum concealment, coordinate with conventional units, and employ the scope to deny the enemy freedom of movement after dark. Security surrounding the technology was absolute. The technical manual designated TM5A9341 for the infrared sniper scope set M2 made it clear that capture was unacceptable under any circumstances. If there was even a risk of the equipment falling into enemy hands, operators were instructed to destroy it immediately. Each unit was issued thermite grenades specifically for this purpose. The inclusion of such measures underscored how strategically valuable the technology was considered at the time. Military planners also recognized an often overlooked aspect of this new capability: its psychological impact. Engaging enemy soldiers who were entirely unaware of being observed placed a unique mental burden on operators. Training materials addressed this directly, framing the mission not as the killing of defenseless opponents, but as a defensive act that saved American lives by disrupting infiltration, ambushes, and nighttime attacks before they could occur. The United States was not alone in exploring infrared weapons. In Europe, German forces had developed their own system, the ZG-1229 Vampire, designed for use with the CG-44 assault rifle. However, German deployment was limited and late. Only small numbers reached frontline units during the final months of the war, with sporadic use reported among Panzer Grenadier formations during the Ardennes offensive and later along the Rhine. In contrast, the American effort distinguished itself not merely through invention but through large-scale deployment, structured training, and strict operational security, particularly in the Pacific theater. Japan, despite possessing a sophisticated optical industry and companies such as Nippon Kogaku, which would later become Nikon, did not pursue comparable infrared solutions for infantry use. This absence reflected a broader imbalance in the Pacific War. While Japanese forces often excelled in night fighting skills and defensive tactics, American industrial capacity and technological innovation repeatedly found ways to counter those strengths. The infrared sniper scope became one such answer. U.S. Army combat records provide clear evidence of its battlefield effectiveness. Regimental journals from the 7th Infantry Division in April 1945 contain repeated references to nighttime engagements at distances previously considered unattainable after dark. One documented action from the 96th Infantry Division on April 15, 1945 describes an infrared-equipped sniper engaging an enemy patrol late at night. At a distance of roughly 75 yards, the operator fired on a group of approximately 12 Japanese soldiers. 8 were killed before the remainder scattered. No American casualties were reported, and notably, the enemy displayed no indication that they had been observed prior to the first shot. Another report from the 7th Infantry Division dated April 28 recounts an engagement along a supply trail shortly after midnight. Using infrared observation, the operator detected an enemy logistics party, eliminated 6 personnel, and then directed mortar fire to destroy their supplies. The report notes that Japanese forces avoided that route entirely in the nights that followed. As a result of this unseen dominance after dark, Japanese units increasingly abandoned surface movement at night. They withdrew deeper into Okinawa. Disease spread quickly in overcrowded subterranean quarters, and the distribution of supplies became erratic. Cohesion among units deteriorated, transforming what was intended to be a protective defensive network into a series of potential traps. The deployment of infrared scopes by American forces did not directly inflict all these losses, but it compelled Japanese commanders to adopt a strategy that precipitated these conditions. The battle for Shuri Castle in late May 1945 starkly illustrated this shift. Shuri, an ancient fortress serving as the headquarters of General Ushima, had been prepared for night counterattacks using sophisticated defensive plans. These contingencies, however, were largely abandoned in response to the Americans' night vision technology. According to records from the 1st Marine Division, anticipated Japanese night offensives during the Shuri engagement never occurred. Enemy activity became largely confined to daylight or the brief periods of dawn and dusk. Nighttime positions were often relinquished without resistance, and captured Japanese soldiers frequently cited apprehension over American night observation capabilities as a primary reason for their restraint. By June 1945, as the Okinawa campaign neared its conclusion, Japanese forces had effectively relinquished all traditional night fighting strategies. In his final directive on June 18, General Ushima explicitly prohibited nighttime operations except in circumstances where survival was deemed impossible, reflecting a stark acknowledgement of the new tactical reality. Statistical analysis underscores the profound impact of this technological advantage. In sectors equipped with infrared devices, American casualties during nighttime engagements fell by approximately 78% compared to earlier conflicts in the Pacific. Japanese night operations, which had historically provided a decisive tactical edge since 1942, virtually ceased to exist. Following Japan's surrender, American technical intelligence teams undertook a comprehensive review of Japanese responses to night vision technology. Strategic bombing survey reports, compiled from interviews with Japanese officers, revealed that while many were aware of some American capability for night observation, none comprehended its full technical scope. The 1946 publication Far East Command Japanese Night Combat Study concluded that the introduction of infrared devices had effectively nullified Japanese night fighting proficiency on Okinawa. This single technological innovation disrupted military doctrines that had evolved over 4 decades, materially hastening the conclusion of the campaign. Interviews with former Japanese officers conducted by occupation authorities consistently highlighted the psychological toll of losing the ability to fight under cover of darkness. Unlike being outnumbered or outgunned, the inability to operate at night, a domain where skill and training had traditionally offset technological disparities, struck directly at the core of Japanese military identity, representing one of the most demoralizing dimensions of the Okinawa conflict. The deployment of infrared-equipped sniper scopes on Okinawa marked a turning point in night warfare, prompting continued refinement and adoption in subsequent conflicts, notably in Korea. By the onset of the Korean War in 1950, enhanced models featuring extended operational range and longer-lasting batteries had become standard issue for certain American units. The M3 carbine fitted with these infrared devices was particularly effective as a defensive asset for fixed positions, offering a specialized solution against nocturnal infiltration attempts. During the early stages of the Korean conflict, Chinese and North Korean troops, many of whom had been advised by Japanese veterans familiar with Okinawa, initially refrained from nighttime attacks on U.S. positions. They operated under the assumption that all American forces possessed night vision capabilities. This caution, shaped by the experiences of Okinawa, inadvertently conferred a strategic edge to U.S. units during the initial phases of hostilities. The psychological imprint of Okinawa's nighttime engagements influenced communist operational doctrine throughout the war. Only after realizing that the majority of American units lacked infrared equipment did large-scale night maneuvers resume. Even then, anxiety lingered among enemy forces. Any unexplained casualty occurring under the cover of darkness was frequently attributed to American infrared technology. The early infrared systems used on Okinawa, which relied on active infrared illumination, quickly evolved. Gradually, passive devices capable of amplifying ambient light replaced these active systems, removing the need for detectable infrared beams. By the Vietnam era, starlight scopes could operate using only faint moonlight or starlight, further diminishing the risk of detection. Modern night vision technology has since advanced through multiple stages, from the rudimentary infrared instruments of the mid-1940s to today's sophisticated thermal imaging and image intensification systems. Contemporary equipment can identify human targets at distances exceeding a mile, regardless of weather, without emitting any visible light. The operational advantage first glimpsed on Okinawa has only grown wider over time. Despite technological progress, the essential principle observed in Okinawa remains: control of the night equates to control of the battlefield. Japanese infantry encountering infrared-equipped snipers in 1945 experienced firsthand the harsh realities of modern nocturnal warfare. Beyond operational effectiveness, the impact of infrared scopes extended into the psychological realm. American operators often reported feelings of moral unease, describing themselves more as executioners than conventional soldiers, engaging targets unable to mount any defense. Post-war research revealed that these soldiers experienced higher levels of combat-related stress compared with their non-sniper peers. The detached mechanical nature of observing enemies through a green-tinted lens, sometimes for prolonged periods before taking action, exacerbated these pressures. Veterans recounted the emotional difficulty of witnessing Japanese troops perform routine tasks such as preparing defensive positions, eating, or writing letters before being engaged. For Japanese forces, the psychological consequences were different but equally intense. Night had traditionally been their domain, a time when their tactical skills were most effective. The sudden erosion of this advantage created a profound sense of vulnerability. Soldiers trained extensively for nocturnal combat found their expertise rendered nearly useless against an adversary with technological capabilities surpassing natural human perception. The loss of the night's relative safety not only affected battlefield outcomes but also left a lasting impression on morale, demonstrating that the struggle for dominance under darkness could carry consequences beyond strategy and statistics. Military analysts examining the nocturnal engagements on Okinawa have identified several critical insights that later shaped U.S. post-war military strategy. The first lesson involves the multiplier effect of unexpected technology on morale and behavior. Although the actual deployment of infrared devices was limited, the perception of their presence instilled widespread fear, effectively hindering Japanese operational activity across the battlefield. In many cases, uncertainty about where these devices were being used proved more disruptive than their physical effects. A second key observation concerns the fragility of doctrinal assumptions. Japanese military planning was grounded in the belief that night fighting inherently favored troops with superior training, regardless of technological disparity. The introduction of infrared equipment directly undermined this assumption, causing the Japanese tactical framework to unravel and leaving units unprepared for engagements that no longer followed expected patterns. The third insight relates to the strategic value of information dominance. The ability to observe enemy movements while remaining concealed generated advantages far beyond what raw firepower alone could achieve. While infrared sniper scopes accounted for a relatively small number of direct casualties, their psychological and tactical influence pervaded the Japanese defensive system, forcing adjustments and inducing caution at multiple levels of command. For decades, the full extent of infrared application on Okinawa remained under strict secrecy. It was not until the 1992 that previously classified materials were released, including Technical Manual TM5 9341, which provided detailed information on sniper scope operation. Allied after-action reports from the 96th and 7th Infantry Divisions, intelligence summaries from the translator and interpreter section, and post-war interrogations conducted by the Strategic Bombing Survey collectively revealed both the groundbreaking nature of this technology and the rigorous efforts undertaken to safeguard its secrets. Even after hostilities ended, access to information on infrared capabilities remained tightly controlled. Veterans who had operated these devices were discouraged from sharing their experiences publicly. This persistent culture of security underscores the value attributed to infrared systems and their anticipated importance in future conflicts. Moreover, the one-sided effectiveness of such technology raised enduring ethical questions. Is it morally defensible to deploy a system that severely limits the enemy's capacity to respond? Operators of infrared sniper scopes faced this dilemma repeatedly during night operations, and post-war military ethicists have continued to debate whether overwhelming technological superiority can coexist with principles of honorable combat. Opinions diverged. Some argued that preserving the lives of friendly soldiers justified any technological advantage, while others maintained that legitimate warfare requires reciprocal risk rather than allowing one side to act with near impunity. From the Japanese post-war perspective, the use of infrared was generally seen as a natural evolution in military capability. The shame lay not in confronting superior technology, but in failing to anticipate and adapt to it. Infrared sniping was interpreted as an extension of American material advantage, frustrating, yet within the bounds of legitimate warfare. The operational success of infrared sniper scopes on Okinawa had long-term repercussions for U.S. military development. Lessons learned in 1945 contributed to a sustained emphasis on achieving and maintaining technological dominance, particularly in sensor systems, surveillance, and information management. This strategic focus, evident in subsequent decades, can be traced directly to the psychological, tactical, and doctrinal impact of these early infrared operations. The idea of dominating the battlefield under the cover of darkness gradually became a cornerstone of American military strategy. Throughout the Cold War, and in the decades that followed, the United States consistently funneled resources into the development of night vision technologies. Each successive generation of these systems further widened the technological divide between forces capable of operating effectively in darkness and those restricted by natural human limitations. What began as a limited experiment with rudimentary infrared devices during the Okinawa campaign evolved into a hallmark of U.S. military superiority. Okinawa offered a stark illustration for potential adversaries. Traditional strengths such as superior training, high morale, or well-established tactical doctrines could be rendered ineffective when confronted with a technological edge in night operations. This realization reverberated globally, prompting armed forces around the world to accelerate research into night vision and complementary sensor systems. What started with just 150 primitive infrared units gradually initiated a broader revolution in the conduct of warfare, setting the stage for decades of technological competition. Declassified materials and technical manuals reveal the specifications of the TRIM M3 carbine equipped with an infrared sniper scope. The complete system weighed between 28 and 30 pounds, making it relatively cumbersome for individual soldiers. Under optimal conditions, targets could be engaged at a distance of up to 125 yards, though in less favorable environments, the effective range dropped to roughly 70 yards. The battery allowed for continuous operation of 20 to 30 minutes, or intermittent use spanning 3 to 4 hours. The image intensifier relied on an RCA1P25 tube, powered by a 6-volt lead-acid battery pack, while the infrared illumination came from a sealed beam lamp fitted with an infrared filter. Overall, approximately 1,700 scopes were manufactured, with only 150 deployed during the Okinawa operation. While primitive by today's standards, these early devices represented a transformative capability in 1945. Infantry units equipped with them could identify and engage enemy targets in complete darkness with unprecedented accuracy, a capability that had never before existed in combat. The deployment of infrared night vision during the Battle of Okinawa marked a critical inflection point in military history, demonstrating the profound impact of technology on modern warfare and foreshadowing decades of innovation and strategic adaptation. For the first time in military history, technological innovation allowed one side to dominate the night, a domain that had long favored those with rigorous training and honed instincts. The Japanese infantry, renowned for their expertise in nocturnal combat over 4 decades, suddenly found their most reliable tactical advantage rendered ineffective. During the closing stages of the Pacific War, around 15 American soldiers equipped with infrared-enabled carbines fundamentally shifted the dynamics of night fighting. While these devices accounted for only a modest fraction of the total casualties, their influence went far beyond simple numbers. They shattered the Japanese army's confidence in its ability to operate under the cover of darkness. The psychological repercussions were profound. Across the entire Okinawa front, Japanese units abandoned nighttime maneuvers, their signature strength not merely in sectors where infrared weapons were deployed. Supply routes became vulnerable, defensive positions were cut off, and coordinated operations collapsed. The complex systems of strategy and tactics that had underpinned Japan's military efforts for years crumbled under the weight of American technology that seemed almost supernatural in its capabilities. Colonel Hirami Yahara, one of the few senior officers to survive the Okinawa campaign, reflected in his memoirs that the Americans had mastered the natural element of night, turning our own ally into a tool against us. We confronted not just greater firepower, but a science that surpassed human skill. Bravery alone could not prevail. The soldiers who operated these early night vision devices were pioneers of a new form of warfare, one in which superior intelligence and situational awareness outweighed raw firepower. Their experiences, encompassing both tactical successes and the heavy psychological demands of this novel combat, laid the groundwork for approaches still central to modern military operations. Okinawa demonstrated how technological breakthroughs could redefine the very nature of war. The infrared-equipped weapons were not merely tools for shooting in the dark. They dismantled an entire doctrine developed over decades. Soldiers who had mastered night fighting since 1904 suddenly faced opponents who could see them clearly while remaining virtually invisible. The impact cannot be fully captured by casualty figures alone. Although only 150 devices were deployed, they accounted for roughly 30% of nighttime Japanese losses in the opening week and contributed to a 94% decline in Japanese night operations. The true victory, however, was psychological. Japanese troops, realizing that their training, experience, and courage were ineffective against technology they neither understood nor could counter, suffered a profound demoralization. From April to June 1945, the nocturnal battles of Okinawa highlighted a lesson that remains relevant in today's conflicts. Control of the unseen is decisive. The side that can observe without being observed does more than gain an advantage, it dominates the battlefield. The early infrared scopes, cumbersome and limited 30 pounds in weight, with a range of only about 70 yards, nonetheless sparked a revolution in military science that continues to evolve. The inability of Japanese soldiers to anticipate such capabilities, combined with American ingenuity, played a significant role in bringing the Pacific War closer to its conclusion. These initial devices offered American troops a vision of warfare's future, a domain where technological edge outweighs sheer manpower, where information is a greater asset than brute force, and where mastery of darkness translates directly into victory. The lessons learned during these night engagements continue to inform modern military strategy. Infrared scopes were more than weapons. They were harbingers of a new era in combat. Japanese forces in 1945 became the first to experience what all modern militaries now accept. In a technologically advanced battlefield, night no longer conceals, and those who cannot see are already at a critical disadvantage.